Hello, and welcome to episode number 122 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. This is your host, Christina, the blue tank. And with me, as always, I have Mark, the green tank, Neil, the orange tank, and Helen, the red tank.
Peace. Oh, no, that's
when you say goodbye.
Yeah. Week too late.
Yeah. So we're here. I actually, unfortunately, have not had a chance yet to listen to last week's episode, but I've been told that there's no possible way I can do a better introduction than last week, which I believe because Walker is very eloquent, so I'll have to go and listen to that. Today, while we just finished playing a game, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some other games. After that, we're going to talk about today's topic, which is how we approach first plays of board games. So, are you the type of player who goes into a first game and it's 100% a learning game? Are you the type of player who goes in and it doesn't matter that it's the first game? You were just going to try to destroy everyone no matter what it takes, Kellen. What kind of player are you? That's what we're here to find out. We don't know yet. We don't know this about each other. We don't know this about you. So here we are.
There's a thing called the tease, where you tease the topic. It's like right after this commercial break. But what you did,
that's what I just did.
Except then you dropped in a little bit of the substance of the thing. So
yeah, I mean, I think that most of our listeners know what kind of player you are, Kellen. So I don't think you're capable of teasing because you've already given it all away.
Oh, I can tease.
Really? Before we talk about that, let's talk about what we've been playing in quarantine. So, Neelan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I played the first solo scenario of the Invasion expansion for Orléans. Orléans is one of my favorite games. It's in my top 50, and I had never owned the Invasion expansion. I've not actually dug through all of the different scenarios that it offers, but I think the most of them are cooperative scenarios. I know there's one that's designed to be like a 1v1 duel scenario. Most of them are cooperative, and there's 2 or 3 solo scenarios in there. So I figured, like, what better time than now to pick up this expansion? Mostly because I've heard from good friend Daniel of the podcast that it's one of his favorite cooperative games is the Invasion expansion. So it seemed like something I should own anyway, and as good a time as any to dig into the solo scenarios. So I played the first scenario, which is called the Dignitary, I think, or Dignitaries. And if you're unfamiliar with Orléans, the basic premise is that it's a bag building game where your tokens are workers that you use to activate actions, but each action has a different cost in combination of workers. So you might need a farmer and a trader to activate this action. So you draw some from your bag and you place them onto different actions in order to activate them. And so what you're doing over time, a lot of those actions are getting you more of those worker tokens, so you just keep adding more and more to your bag. You get to draw more tokens over time in order to activate more and more actions as you proceed. There's a map that you move around, which you're using to collect goods, lay down trading posts, collect coins, and whoever has the most victory points at the end wins. What this first solo scenario does is it kind of strips out a lot of those mechanics, so you don't have to collect the goods anymore. It's all about collecting citizen tiles. The citizen tiles in the original game are a way to additionally score, but in this first solo scenario, all you're required to do is just get 8 of those citizen tiles, and then you've won the scenario. And that's actually in what's called the hard difficulty, which kind of leads me to something that was very strange about this solo scenario is that it was incredibly easy. There were 16 rounds total, and I managed to get to 8 in the first 12, and I got all the way up to 11 by the 16th round. So it just doesn't feel like the difficulty is really tuned there, which is probably one of the most important things for a solo game, because if you don't have a concrete goal that's hard to work towards, you're just like flailing around doing anything. Like if you don't have to refine what you're focusing on, it kind of just feels like the whole thing falls apart. So that's not the best first experience. I mean, you could plausibly make that goal arbitrarily higher. I could say next time I play it, I have to get 12 citizen tiles, and then maybe it would be a worthwhile experience. But I'm hoping for better from the rest of the solo scenarios. But this did encourage me to want to play more Orléans on Tabletop Simulator, so I might be doing that maybe in the co-op modes. I'm excited to explore that now that I've had this reinvigorated interest in Orléans, which is, like I said, a game I like a lot. It's not very hard to explain. It's got a pleasant nature of just, you're pulling stuff out of the bag, seeing what you can do with it. The puzzle of figuring out how to use those workers is satisfying. Yeah.
So is there a way to up the difficulty? You said there was multiple scenarios of co-op. Is there a way to up the difficulty of the Dignitary without just making stuff up like you just said?
as I said, like out of the box, the rule is written is 7 citizen tiles on the easy difficulty and 8 on the hard difficulty. And that's all that's written in the book. So even I achieved the hard difficulty on the first try. So I don't think so, short of just like, arbitrarily boosting that goal.
How does that scale with, like, because you could have 2 players playing, right? Instead of just you playing it solo, or is this a solo only?
This is solo specifically. So there are 3 that are designed to be solo, and I think 2 or 3 that are designed for co-op.
Could you have been doing the rules incorrectly? Did you get a sense that you might have been doing the rules wrong?
I thought it was possible, but then I spoke to a friend, Marnie Lee, who's one of our moderators, and she said the exact same thing. In fact, she said literally the same thing. She got to 11 by the end of the time. So that made me feel like it was just like a universal problem.
And that was my next question. Have you checked to see if this is a common complaint?
I've actually not done that in a wider extent. I should dig into that because, it would be strange. Because I'm certainly not like, I'm not amazing at Orléans or anything. Like, I've played it, but not like egregiously more than any other game I have. But I wouldn't have thought that it would be tuned that way.
That's the kind of thing that bugs me when it comes to solo games that have you, going for a score, because your way to solve it is probably the only way to solve it, which is to just arbitrarily give yourself a higher target to aim for, but then that sort of cheapens the entire experience in my estimation.
Yeah, I agree, because I actually think it's one of the most important things to get right in a cooperative game is tuning the difficulty so that you don't succeed on the first try. Like any solo or co-op experience that you win on the first attempt, in my mind, just hasn't been playtested enough. Because there should be a tangible goal to work towards.
Right. I think it's interesting. A lot of people who play solo games talk about, well, since there's no one else here, I'll bend the rules wherever I feel like it. Like, hey, it's near the end of the game, I'll just change this. And the idea that you might, near the end of the game, go, 7 is too easy, so I'm going to make it 9.
Right.
Like, to me, just reveals, like, the complete lack of anything. Like the complete lack of tension in what you're doing.
Breaks the sense that it's even a game.
Yeah. Right.
And the thing is, it could be so easily remedied. For what it's worth, I set it to 8 because just to give myself a challenge, because I would much rather have. So from the get-go, I knew that was my target. And there's a point of about the third way where I'm thinking, to actually get there, it's going to be quite on the tightrope edge. And that's exactly what you want. You want to feel like, oh man, I'm going to have to sacrifice this just to eke out this one last one. And then it just cascades in a way that was, like I said, unsatisfying.
Not to belabor it too much, it's interesting in video game land, they can cheat a lot and make it seem like you're getting more hurt than you are, or allowing you to survive when you only have 1 health left, and in normal situations your character would just die. The game sometimes give you that last little bit to make it feel like, I just almost did it. Whereas in a board game, the balance that they can do on the fly is nothing. They have to build the automa to be able to do that for you. So it's a much harder thing to do, I think, in a board game.
It's kind of like that thing they say with like D&D DMs. The good ones will be fudging results behind the screen just to give players that feeling close to the edge, right? And without building that somehow into a concrete rule set, like you said, I don't think you could really. But I think that's all I have to say about Orléans for now. I'm certainly going to be playing more of it. I'm not usually one to do like co-op scenarios two-handed, but depending on how fast I blow through the solo stuff, I might do that.
I just use my dominant hand.
Sorry, your less dominant hand?
No, I just play both players with one hand.
I see, with one hand.
Yeah, the right hand.
One hand Kellen is what they call him.
Just like 3 Train New York.
What? They don't even know what you're talking about.
It's a tease. I'm teasing for the next game that we're talking
just learned
about.
She learned from
I learned from the tease master.
Callan?
Well,
that's the other thing they call him. They call him One Hand Kellen and Tease Master Kellen. Those are the 2 primary nicknames.
The One Hand Tease Master.
I don't know what you're referring to, but that's inappropriate.
That was Orléans Invasion.
Wait, say it the way Bigney says it. To honor Walker and So Very Wrong About Games, you got to say it the way that Bigney says it.
I don't think I can.
Thank you, Neelan. That was a very enlightening discussion. So moving on to the game that I played this week with Kellen was Zoned Out by Grey Fox Games. This is a review copy we received. So Kellen and I played earlier this week. So this is a tile-laying hand management game in which each player is building out their part of the city, and they're trying to build up different types of buildings that will score in a variety of ways. So There are some open victory conditions, and then each player also has hidden victory conditions. This is a very puzzly game. It's essentially you're taking a hand of 3 cards, which feels pretty tight, and you are trying to decide what you can build out, what type of combinations of buildings you can build, depending on your score conditions and depending on the open score conditions.
Yeah, so a scoring condition might be, one of the open ones might be whoever has scored the most on yellow buildings, which respond to the commercial buildings. And so, you may be able to score more individual points by going into residential buildings, but you have to balance that with the fact that, well, we know that commercial buildings are going to be worth more in this game.
Yep. So another scoring condition is there's a downtown center in the very middle of the city that you're building, and it's a little bit of area control depending on which quadrant you build your buildings in. You get to add to a skyscraper in that quadrant, and then that's part of a scoring condition at the end. So yeah, Kellen, what did you think of Zoned Out?
So Zoned Out really stands out physically, aesthetically. It has a very weird art style, and then it has translucent pastel skyscrapers that you build in 3D. So I knew that this was going to be amazing for Instagram. It had relatively high reviews for the limited reviews it had out, so I wanted to check it out. There's a lot to like here. I think that anything that uses hidden and public scoring conditions is super fun. So it harkens back to Trois, where you kind of have to pay attention to what other people are doing because you score for their victory condition in addition to your victory conditions. There are a lot more of them. I think there are 20 of those potential scoring conditions. And in a 2-player game, you get 2, there's 2 open, and the other player gets 2. In any other player count, you only get 1. And so that's more of a little bonus than the main point of the game. What I think is interesting is that it isn't the case where you're building out multiple cities all around the map, and then at the end of the game, they all score. You have one city planner. And when that city planner leaves a building site and goes to a new one, you must score the building site that you're leaving. And so you can't just go, okay, 1 pink, 2 pink, 3 pink, 4 pink, and then come back to it later when you get the cards that you need. Once you abandon that site is done and scored. And there's exponential scoring for those building sites. So it creates an interesting tension about when to leave. There are also a lot of restrictions in how you can interact with the other player, because you can put these cards down, these tile cards. They're cards, but they have 4 squares on them, and they're square cards. You can put them down anywhere, provided it doesn't interact directly with the zone that an opponent's city planner piece is in. So you can't blow up their current project that they're working on, but you can basically blow up right outside that point and make it very difficult for them to continue expanding. Or there are a lot of bonuses that depending on how they lay their tile, these bonuses can stack. And so there are a couple of times where Kellen and I were trying to block those bonuses or like break a chain of bonuses, and that can really impact the score as well. Yeah, I don't understand. For some reason, having a park adjacent to your house gets you bonus points. I kind of thought that would be negative
Of course, Kellen doesn't understand that.
How did you guys like it as a 2-player? Because I feel like a game with area control-y type things as a 2-player just often feels like zero-sum in terms of you hurting the other person. Did that feel that way?
Well, I think Kellen probably felt that way more than I did. I really liked it. I thought it worked well, and it wasn't that interactive, I guess, to answer your question. Mm-hmm. I didn't really feel like we were fighting that much over, it didn't feel that area control-y to me. For the most part, we were just doing our own things, and then occasionally I was like, oh shoot, Kellen's really running away there, I better stop him.
Got it.
That's when I would jump in and impact what he was doing, but otherwise we didn't interact that much, which I know Kellen doesn't like.
Yeah, the zoning restrictions were such that you really couldn't gotcha. It's more like adjacent to a gotcha. Mm-hmm. And that was the first thing that I did not like about Zoned Out. And the second thing being it commits one of the, in my mind, cardinal sins of a game where you only have a hand of 3 cards, which is that at the beginning of your turn, you can choose to discard 1, 2, or 3 cards, but you take a penalty point, a penalty chip, and then at the end of the game, there's an exponential curve to the amount of penalty chips that you have. So it's like if you have 3 penalty chips, it's 9, and 4 penalty chips is 17 or whatever. And I usually find that comes from a lack of balance to the hand management itself, where it's like, yeah, we'll just put in a system that at any time you could discard your whole hand, but then you're having to calculate out the math of what you could potentially score versus what that negative point is. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like a relief valve on something where the hands of cards should just be higher, or the hand management should work in such a way that like you don't just get hosed by the cards that you have. And so I frowned when I got to that part of the rule book, and it did in fact play out that way. It is beautiful to look at. It was a pleasant hour to spend together. I'd be interested to see it at a higher player count, but this isn't one that I'm stoked about. I think Christina liked it a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, it was super, super light, and it was fun almost in like a solo puzzly, but a little bit competitive sense. So I was having fun just like, oh yeah, look at this card hand draw, and then, and then getting to build out my perfect little building zone, and I know that I'm getting Kellen because he doesn't know what my scoring. Like, it had that fun sense of you're building up your city, but it was not like challenging. There was nothing really tense about it at any point. It's a game you can just zone out during.
I was just going to make the same joke. I was going to say, so it's not really heavy. You can just play it if you're zoned out.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
There's got to be a drug reference hidden in this title, because if you look at the art, it's like this close to psychedelic right. If you start zooming in on it.
It's very like light bright almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, light bright aesthetic. But I think you, Christina,
I enjoyed it. I had fun, and I won. And I also, as I was just waiting for Kellen, as soon as we scored, I was like, well, he's not going to like this one. And he was like, yeah, I didn't really like that. And I just, I know I didn't get to speak my piece about Bronze Age, which I loved. And I kept telling Kellen, I'm like, let's play it again then. If you didn't like it, let's play it again. I think you're going to like it. I see you, Kellen. Don't think I can't see you. He's flipping me off. And so he was like, okay, fine, we'll play it again. And I won again. And then he was like, this is dumb. Like, okay, let's play it again. Because he kept saying it was luck. So he played like 5 times and I won every single time. And so
when did this happen? While I was sleeping? What are you talking about? The 3rd, 4th, and 5th game? What?
No, you don't remember playing?
Well, you're just making shit up.
I'm not. Anyways, I won and he didn't like it. And then he comes on the podcast and trash talks it. And I really liked it. I didn't get to say how much I liked it and why I liked it. I know I'm running over our time. Anyways, I just wanted to shout out to Mark Bigney. Thank you for printing that and sending that to us. And thank you for the note. It was very nice. I loved it.
About thank you, John.
I can't wait to play it again with somebody who actually appreciates the beautiful.
Well, you're never
game
getting
design.
out of this house.
All right.
It's just the two of us.
That was Zoned Out and Bronze Age. No, that was Zoned Out. And next, we want to hear what Mark played.
All right, so let me tell you. So this quarantine has been an opportunity for me to go into the depths of my collection and to bring out games that don't often get played, primarily low player count games, even more primarily than that, 2-player games. So I've had Santorini on my shelf for a long time, but I've never had a chance to play it.
Oh, this is your first time playing it.
My first time playing it, yeah. So I finally got a chance to break it out. Santorini is basically sort of an abstract game. It says it plays up to 4, but you really only want to play it at 2 players. It's an abstract game. What you're doing in Santorini is you've got a small grid. I think it's like a 5x5 grid. You have 2 workers. On your turn, you're going to move one of your workers either orthogonally or diagonally, and then you're going to have them build either orthogonally or diagonally to wherever they've just moved to. When you have them build, they can build a tower up to 3 levels high, but they must be built in order. So if I move a worker and I have him build on a place that has been built, he must build the 1st level tower. And then on my next turn, or for my opponent's turn, they move their worker adjacent to that tower. They can build it so that the tower is now a 2nd level tower, and then a 3rd level tower. And then if you want, you can put a cap on the tower, and that blocks the win condition, because the win condition in Santorini is to move one of your workers to a 3rd level tower. One of the movement rules is that whenever you move your worker, you can move them on the same level, or you can move them 1 level up. So if I have a worker that's on the ground and he's adjacent to a level 1 height building, I can move them to the level 1 height building, and then from there on the next turn, if there's a 2nd story building adjacent, they can move to that. And then
you got to build a little staircase.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You got to build a staircase to the 3rd level. But again, any 3rd level building can be capped and therefore made inaccessible for the win condition.
So if you cap it, you don't get that win condition either?
No. If it's been capped, then nobody can use that tower as a place to win the game. And in fact, there is also a loss condition where if you cannot move either of your workers or do the build action. You must do both on your turn. You must both move and build. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you cannot move and or build, you lose. So it's a way to win and a way to lose. And then finally, and this is an aspect of the game I just dipped my toe into, there are variable player powers that are crazy from what I understand. The game comes, I think, with 30 player powers that you can randomly assign or choose at the beginning of the game, and they are significant rule breakers. They either break rules or give you your own new win condition. So I really, really like Santorini. I like abstract games. I don't really mind abstract games in general. And this is a pretty beautiful abstract game. It harkens to the namesake, the city of Santorini, with its white and blue buildings. The board isn't especially colorful or anything, but it's very clean and looks really pretty.
Yeah.
It looks really nice.
It's very striking. Like, in fact, I would say it's one of the most beautiful looking. Once you're in the middle of the game and there's a mix of different, heights of towers, it's stunning looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also different editions of this, though, that are more or less stunning.
Right.
Because I believe as it's become more of a mass market game, they've gotten rid of the pedestal that it sits on, or there's...
I have the mass market edition, and there's just one level of the 3-level pedestal. It didn't seem like a big loss. I found it quite striking as is.
Does the version you have have the brown cliff bottom?
It does.
Oh,
have
okay.
the brown.
Oh, yeah. I thought that was not in the mass market, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think there was a water level or some air, some other blue level underneath.
Yes, that's right. Oh, that's all that they all then removed. Okay, yeah, that's not a big deal.
This one is so interesting because it's basically tricking people into playing an abstract game.
I think that's true, but it's a good one.
I personally think it works better without the player powers, and the player powers are not in any way balanced.
Yeah, so I played it 3 times, twice without the player powers and once with it, and I found the player powers interesting, but I think the more game experience I felt sort of shown through in the non-player power edition. It felt to me like a chess-like game.
Yep, absolutely.
So having the player powers didn't seem necessary.
I think that the player powers add a layer of fun to the game that I think is definitely worth exploring. But yeah, like Helen said, there are combinations of them that are just wildly unbalanced.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never played with the player powers, but it sounds like it would.
You played Santorini?
Yeah, I played it with Neelan 6 years ago.
And you liked it?
Yes. Neelan, do you remember?
I remember, yeah. I think I brought it around to your place, probably when we
were... Where was I?
You were there, too.
I think you were there. It was when we... Actually, probably one of the first times we probably hung out together, pretty early.
That bonded our friends.
Yeah. Forever bonded by Santorini.
Callan's totally forgot.
Yeah, exactly. Very memorable to you, Callan.
So that is Santorini, a really simple abstract game that I think is easy to teach, easy to play, and scratches the chess abstract sort of consider your move, consider the possible moves you're allowing your opponent, and that sort of strategic planning, but in a very small package and a very small time frame. I think none of the games I played lasted longer than probably 30 minutes. I can't imagine anything went longer than 30, so it plays real quick. So I would recommend Santorini.
I always forget I'm supposed to transition. I'm like, what are we waiting for? Okay. Thank you, Mark, for talking about Santorini.
Hey, you're welcome, Christina.
So let's have Kellen tell us about a game that we all just played together on Tabletopia. My nemesis.
Tabletopia.
So we'll start this discussion by saying that this game is currently live on Kickstarter and will be for the next few days. So if you listen to this and this sounds interesting, you can play on Tabletop Simulator and pick up a copy of Mini Express. Mini Express is a 1-hour train game. And when I say train game, that means building routes on a board. That means investing in shares of certain types of trains. And that means high levels of interactivity. In Mini Express, you can actually only do 2 things, and those 2 things are build track on the board or buy shares of trains. There are 4 colors of trains on the map, and as you build track, you are gaining more influence with the various train companies, and then you spend that influence in order to buy shares of those train companies. And how the game works is at the end of the game, you will score points. If you have the most influence in a company, your shares of that company will be worth the most, and second most, and then everyone else scores the least amount. This is a game where every decision you make matters. This is a game where when you place out a bunch of track for a railroad, you're actually lowering the stock price for the next player in turn order. So each turn, you could build one of 4 railroads. You could buy one of 4 stocks in those railroads, but you have to sit and evaluate, well, what do those options do for me, and what will they open up for the next player in the turn order? even on Tabletopia, and so this is because these online platforms take at least 30% longer, and I would say even 50% longer, because the first 10 minutes of an online game are, can you hear me? I can't hear you from a submarine. Or maybe we're just old and don't know how to use technology anymore.
Mark
but I don't
does
think
spend
it's that.
a lot of time in a submarine.
I gotta get underwater. It's where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah.
But this game clocked in at 1 hour. It was very cutthroat. It was a little unclear. Honestly, it's one of those games where you need to take 2 or 3 turns, and then boom, all of the interlockings make sense, and you're off to the races with what you can do. I employed a strategy of really building out the orange train and just ensuring that I would have the most shares of that train as well. It looked like about quarter of the way through the game that I had overextended on orange, but then some yuckfucks, the 3 of you that I'm looking at right now, still continued to invest in orange, even though it was clear I was in the lead and likely going to win in both shares and influence, which ultimately was all of your downfalls as I beat you by 50%. No, probably not 50%.
Yeah, not 50%, but
I think it actually was just about
to
that.
be continued on that. We will not let that brag go unresponded to. Just you wait.
Mini Express is actually the sequel to a game called Mini Rails, which is another 1 hour train-like game that we have not played. So this is a bit like reviewing Spider-Man 2 after not seeing the original Spider-Man 1.
Sure. So
Yeah, a lot of people have said that.
yeah, just as common as 3 trains in New York, right?
What did you all think of Mini Express?
I liked it a lot. I was super impressed by, like you were saying, how cutthroat it felt for how short it was and for how elegant and clean everything felt. Like Kellen was saying, there were really only 2 things you could do. You build tracks or you buy stock. And so for it being that simple and still having like this depth to it, I was pretty impressed by it. I don't know that I've seen that in quite a while. So I really enjoyed it. What did you guys think?
I would say that it felt less, to me, cutthroat than it did high pressure. Like, it is very interactive, but I didn't ever feel like I was making aggressive moves, at least not aggressive to my opponents. There might have been moves that I extended myself or I made big pushes, but it doesn't feel cutthroat to me, but it feels great. I mean, that level of tension, it's very high tension, and I love that. That's fantastic.
Well, I'll just say, going right after you, Mark, you basically almost every time did the thing that I was going to do.
Okay.
So it felt cutthroat to me.
Okay, that makes sense. It feels a lot like Irish Gauge and other winsome sort of games, but if you have played Irish Gauge and you enjoy it, I think Mini Express is an absolute no-brainer.
The things I liked about it is how there's such a very one-to-one through line between what you do on your turn defines what the next player is able to do. So every decision is meted by, okay, I can extend this train line, but then I make the stock super, super cheap for, in the case of our game, for Mark. That decision is super interesting because you're always evaluating what is going to be the least valuable to one specific player throughout the game to some extent. And not necessarily because, there's a chance that Mark might forgo a stock and then pass on to the next player. But often I was trying to think like, okay, I could do this, but I know that Mark really, really wants that stock, so it's probably a bad move for me. And it just has that sort of very clean one-to-one consideration of this is what it's going to cost me, and this is how it's going to benefit people down the line. And that's the interesting decision you want. So sort of foregoing all of the rules grit and just having 2 very clean decisions, buy stock or lay rail, but offloading all of the interesting choices into how this affects other players is sort of exactly what you want from like a 1 hour game. So I was super into it.
Yeah, the rules also took 10 minutes?
You're welcome.
I didn't say they were good rules, but they were fast.
So this comes to us from Taiwanese publisher Moedius Game Design. I'm sure I butchered that, but they did Tulip Bubble, which we've played and enjoyed, and Symphony No. 9, which is one that we've always wanted to get our hands on, but still have not tried. It is running on Kickstarter now. I think one of the biggest things that everyone's talking about is whether or not it qualifies as an 18xx light game. And it's funny because on the Kickstarter page, it says, literally in quotes, some say this is an 18xx light game, but rest assured that the core mechanics are quite original to the train game genre. And the designer online is saying, it's a complete misnomer, literally, to refer to it as an 18xx game. Yeah. Beyond the fact that it's tight and a train game and with highly interactive choices.
Right. Yeah, I would say it is a cube rail / winsome game. I mean, it shares the veneer of an 18XX, but if you're looking for 18XX Lite, I would say Go City of the Big Shoulders for sure, as opposed to this.
Yeah, I like to be very clear when we really like something. You know, I've looked at the Kickstarter page twice in the last half hour since we got done playing it, and I am going to back it after we finish the record.
Yeah,
for sure.
I had the exact same reaction. Like in the 20 minutes between us finishing that game and starting to record, I put the $1 pledge onto the Kickstarter. So
yeah, I think it's, if you like interaction, if you like tight decisions, if you like Irish Gauge, I don't know how many people have played that, but if you like Irish Gauge, if you like winsome games, this is like an absolute no-brainer. It's right in the same alley.
It did make me more excited to play Irish Gauge, which I've not done yet.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, it would be a struggle for me to like cross compare them right now, but there is a little bit of push your luck in Irish Gauge that's not present here. You know,
sure,
everything here is out on the map and open information.
Right, that's true.
And I liked the push your luck in Irish Gauge. That's not I know other people might consider that a detractor, but so that was Mini Express, and if you are listening to this through the following Tuesday, I believe that's when the Kickstarter ends. So do check that out. It's pretty cool.
Those are the games we played this week. If you want to come talk to us about those games or other games, we're usually easy to find on Discord. So you can go to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. And we'll all be there. I was told that Mark will be there if you tag him within like 30 seconds or something. So
that's right.
I don't know if that's been verified, but
I only come when beckoned.
Christina and I like to fight. We like to air our fights on Discord.
We use it as a threat more than we actually do it because Kellen knows he's wrong and he'll be arguing something. I'm like, okay, let's ask the Discord then. Let's see what the Discord thinks. And then he'll shut up because he's like, oh no, please don't ask the Discord. Then they'll know I'm an idiot and mean and wrong.
That sounds like something Kellen would say.
It was the case of the eaten toast.
Yeah, we had one. I posted a picture because Kellen asked if he could have a little bite of my toast.
Well, I asked for a bite.
After I offered to make him, I was like, do you want a piece of toast? He said no. After I made it, I was like, okay, do you want a little bite of my toast? And he said,
do you want a bite
He
of my
said
toast?
yes. And it was comical. This was something you would see in a cartoon, like in Tom and Jerry, like where he took the piece of toast and he put the whole piece of toast in his mouth and then bit down right in the middle.
It's not.
So, I mean, you're picturing it and your imagination is right. But if you don't trust your imagination, feel free to go to Discord, the food channel. I posted a picture of it. So I won that argument. We also had a little book club recently that was really fun in Discord. So come join us. Getting back to the podcast episode for today, let's talk about our feature topic, which is how we approach first games. And this came up because of the game we played today, actually. This was our first playthrough of Mini Express. And I had a sort of revelation while I was playing this game, which is that I have completely changed. I've evolved. I've changed the way that I approach first gameplays. That's called a tease. So who knows how I've evolved. Let's hear from the group. How do you all approach first plays?
I have not evolved in my approach to first plays. My first play of a game is much like my 10th play of a game. I want to try to figure out how to win. And it's sort of silly because I understand that the strategy for a game won't become apparent to me upon first play. And I know that it will require more plays to really wrap my mind around it. And it even occurs to me that if I played the first couple plays more loosely and if I try to pull some levers here, push buttons there, I might get better for subsequent plays. I know all of that, but I can't help but play every game to win. And honestly, this is a character flaw, I'm sure, but I get frustrated when I play poorly, even when I go in there with no prior knowledge. I beat myself up is too strong a term, but I do sort of agonize over bad choices. Again, even though I had no way to anticipate them or no way to know how to deal with them. But for me, first plays are like 10th plays. I want to try to figure out the way to win.
I think it's safe to say, though, that you're also better at first plays than other people. Like, you pick up rules faster and you can get in and you do win more often in first plays than other people.
Maybe. I think agree? That probably bears out, but
you and Kellen are kind of both that way.
And I wonder if that, and it probably is at a sacrifice of enjoying games more, but I do enjoy the win. So maybe for me that metric is different than others.
I think, I have and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, the burden of always being good at the beginning of things. And I think it even applies broadly to almost any type of skill. One of the things I would say is that I feel like even in the podcasting sense, I understood what to do from the get-go, and you now both have improved and in many ways surpassed me, literally in how to record and make a podcast. I feel like I just have an intuitive sense for how to do anything. When I was a kid, it was always video games with me and my little brother. I would always be better than him at the beginning, and by the end, he was always beating me. And so, my favorite time is when a new Super Smash Brothers game comes out, because I got about 2 weeks where I'm the guy, and then I'm not the guy anymore. And I get beat over and over again. But as it relates to board games, I do feel like I have an intuitive sense of good strategies or ways to start. I do feel like my win rate is always the highest on first place. I feel like I usually win, and obviously Mark and I are always competing over who's going to win in our 3-player bouts. But
place.
Bouts?
Well, I'm saying you and Mark are the contenders in first place.
And then by the end, you...
me and Neelan, we
I
shine.
See.
I think what's interesting that you touched on there, Kellen, which is something we've spoken about a lot offline and maybe on the podcast, I forget, which is just this idea of different rates of learning, which is like, in my way, just like visualizing them as sort of curves. Like, I feel like you sort of get past that uphill very quickly. Whereas my process of learning, especially on first blush, is one of exploration. Like, I like to explore a system and explore a mechanic to like the full extent before I feel like I want to dive into a specific on it. In that case, that often means that the best way I learn a game is by first fumbling around a bit and then sort of honing in on the strategies I like in subsequent plays. That's not to say I'm sort of trying any less hard to win, especially when it's the 4 of us playing. I'm trying to win my damnedest. It's just not the best way for me to learn necessarily. So I think that one of the things that will bear out over multiple plays is that I tend to, over the course of having done that exploration, honed in on the things that work best for me. I'm not very good at intuiting that. And I think that extends to like a lot of just the way that I think about things, frankly. Like, I don't do very well at quick decisions. I like to elaborate on having all the information. And I think that's probably the biggest influence on the way that I approach first games. Now, that said, like, depending on whom I'm playing with, I can dial the competitiveness down. Like, depending if I'm among people where I feel like we're just playing like a less strategic game per se, then it might just...
If you're playing with anybody other than us.
Well, basically, yeah. If I'm playing anything other than the 4 of you, I can get to a point of, okay, let's explore this together, which I don't feel like we reliably do when the 4 of us play, because it's much more focused on winning.
Yeah, it gets super competitive.
I think, Neelan, it'll be helpful to be really specific here, right? Because when I approach a first play of a game, let's use Trois as a great example, because it's really easy for me to articulate. In Trois, there is a system where you have influence points, and those influence points allow you to re-roll your dice and flip them to the opposite side. And so there are strategies in the game where you could be exploiting a lot of influence, which would widen the decision space, would give you more options to do. In a first play of a game like Trois, I would never focus on a strategy that increases the amount of decisions that I would be able to make. In addition to that, I would look at cards that give you combos. And so if there's a decision tree that goes, okay, this can combo with that, and that is risky, I would attempt to not go down that path. So my mind just goes through the game and goes, okay, that's a risky path. That's a risky path. Let's shut down what's available to me so that I can get to efficiency faster. Mm-hmm. That bears out in games where you are competing, like in Seven Wonders, where you're competing over science. And it's an exponential curve, but everyone's competing with each other over a limited pool. I will immediately say I'm not going for that in a first play, because I don't see the value in trying to get caught up in that. And it feels like that is a risk reward that will happen in the right game when the cards are right, but it's probably not going to be right in the first play, or I don't have enough experience to do it. So I'm going to do what I know can work right now. And so I think that I block off those paths if we're extending it to the video game Sonic analogy. Like, I'm just ignoring where I don't want to go and just getting right through it.
I think the Trois example is excellent, because I remember our first game of it, like one of the very first things I did was go down the white dice route, which is literally, like you said, expanding your options down the line. And, that didn't work out well for me, but I like the idea of, I'm going to do this thing that's going to give me more ability to do more things. And that definitely didn't pay off in that game.
Yeah, it extends itself to like loan mechanisms in games. Anytime that exists, I don't want to do it for the first couple of plays because it just feels like a way to exponentially lose. It depends on how it bears out, but...
Yeah, so I think, Kellen, you're really good at intuiting what that is, like how to narrow those decision points, which I'm not always clear on. But I think that's also partly because you're often the one learning the rules and teaching the game. And so I feel like for a lot of first plays, you go into it with a higher level of understanding, which allows you to know how to narrow your options.
Yeah, I'd be actually interested if we wanted to start keeping track, and I won't be keeping track because I'm not a loser, but if you guys wanted to keep track of who taught the game,
right?
I think that would be an interesting thing to try to graph against win rates, because I think that's certainly true.
Yeah, and that's something that I have struggled with because I tend to not be the person to learn.
You tend to not? What was the last rule book you read?
It was sometime at Dice Tower West. I don't know. I didn't even teach it. What was that?
Yeah, that was hilarious. I can't remember what it was.
Mike Delisio can vouch for me there. I was
Mike Delicious.
Mike Delicious.
We call him
knows.
Mike Delicious.
Well, we call him Mike Delisio.
No, we don't.
And Mike Delicious.
And what
Depending
else?
on what?
Fandango.
And Fandango. So, as I was saying, I tend to not be the person teaching the game.
You've never taught a game.
And I have taught a game.
To
Kellen.
who? To me? You've never taught a game to me.
Okay, well, I've taught a game to other people.
Like who?
I don't know, at Dean's house.
That's never happened.
It has. Oh, also, I recently taught an Oink game. I don't think I taught it very well, but I taught it.
To who?
To people at Barrage West, or what was that called?
BGB West.
BGB West, yeah. Which one was it? It was the...
Fafnir.
Yeah, Fafnir. I love Fafnir. I taught it to a little group of people. Dan was in that group.
Just like the little bite that I had.
What?
Excuse me?
Anyways, like I was saying, I never teach games. There you go. I never teach the game. I never am the one to go research and learn it. And I also am a really visual learner, so I have a very, very hard time listening to rules. I legitimately don't understand any game that I'm taught until about halfway through the first play, which definitely influences my experience of first plays. And previously, I was always kind of like Mark was describing, really beating myself up if I didn't win. And I would treat a first play like a 10th play. Like the stakes were so high. I was so competitive. I was so upset if I made a mistake. Like 2 turns later, I would look back and like, oh my gosh, why didn't I take that opportunity to do that combo? You know, I'd be so mad at myself. And I feel like recently I'm finally kind of like, oh, I am learning this game. Like there's actually no possible way that I can understand all of the mechanics on my first turn of my first play of this game. And like Neelan was saying, I do still kind of, obviously I'm still trying to win and I still want to win, but I'm not necessarily beating myself up as much as I used to. And that's very new. And it was kind of nice to realize that.
And it makes a lot of sense. Touching on like first play strategies that Neelan and Kellen have talked about, I think the way I approach playing a first game in terms of strategic planning is I look for a combo that will manifest itself in the future. I look for something that I can see down the road as being a big scoring combo, and I will focus on that. That will be my play. Like I'll be like, okay, goal number 1 is to try to execute this long-term strategy. Now, I may be forced to zig or zag and change that because I'm not familiar with the game and I'm not familiar with how a game plays itself out. But when it comes to playing, because I'm playing to win, I do look for that high scoring end game.
But you're able, that's the thing though. It's like you're able to recognize that combo so early on, where sometimes when I'm playing games with you, Mark, and it's a first play, I'm just like, Mark's playing a different game than I am. I have no idea what he's doing and I'm sure it's right, but I'm just going to focus on what I think I can do the best. You know
Kellen
what I mean?
has invented a meta game that I'm quite fond of, which is the try to figure out what Mark is going to do to win the game. And I think that's a fun little game to play on the side when you play anything with Mark.
So I think Neelan and maybe you and I can workshop this topic offline, and it's approaching more of a ludology type discussion than a board game barrage discussion. But I would say this and ask for your answer. I would say that when Kellen takes a turn, the thought process is, I feel like this is my best move. And when Neelan takes a turn, it's, I think this is my best move.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That's true on my end.
beyond first. That's just how I play board
Yeah,
games.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's the thing that I know personally I would acknowledge as maybe not being my strength is
feeling
or just being like looking at a thing and being like, okay, this is what I need to do. I have to work through variables. Like I have to do the legwork before I make a decision.
Yeah, you're like mathing it out. And when you don't have all of the variables, it's like painful to your brain because you know you can't make an optimal decision. Yeah. And Kellen is just kind of like, okay, feel ski this, feel ski that. I'm going to do it. And Mark is like, combo. Mark has all the variables somehow and actually knows and puts them all together and makes the combo. So another thing that kind of made me realize that the way I was playing first games was kind of crazy was when Daniel, our friend, taught us Kemet for the first time, or it was my first time playing. And I was really excited. I knew it was the type of game I would like. And I actually felt a lot better about that game. For a first play, I felt like I knew more. Maybe it was just chance. I just felt better about that game as a first play. Like I felt like I chose a specific power tile strategy and just stuck with that the whole time. And it seemed like it was really working. And I didn't win, but at the end of it, I was like, oh, that was a better first play than normal. And Daniel was like, that was good for a first play, like kind of talking about it specifically in the context of it being a first play. And I just had never had that framework before. To me, it was like, that was that you played a good game or you didn't play a good game. And I was just kind of like, oh, huh. Is that how other people think about playing a first game? Like, you're not expected to win on your first play, even when you're playing against other people that have played before? Like, I always just felt like it doesn't matter if there's any disparity in who's played how many times, like, you should win even if it's your first time.
Right.
And so that was kind of like, oh, maybe not everybody plays this way, and I should not be so hard on myself.
That was just him trying to console you. Because you got.
I did not get last place.
I don't remember who got last place.
Probably
Kemet's
Kellen.
not a good game.
It was Kellen.
Well, I wasn't in last, was I?
Yeah, I think you
yeah, because you don't like that game.
You didn't like it, ergo you were lost.
Yeah, exactly.
The math checks out on that.
I feel like a lot of the really complicated games, like even Mezzo. Do you remember how the first few turns we were all like, what is going on? I mean, I felt that way anyways. And then after, I don't know, maybe halfway through, it was kind of like, oh, okay. All of these different separate mechanics are starting to piece together in my mind, where at the beginning we were just like, what are the games where we start a game and it's like, I have no idea.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's an important thing to like touch on is like, we often start a game and like, what do you even do here? What am I even doing?
Yeah.
And, you know, 3 turns in, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. I get this now. But then you start to think like, okay, I would have done my first 3 turns completely differently. But we tend not to think about that too much in the context of being super competitive in the first game. Like you said, it's probably, as a lot of other people sort of approach first games, of just thinking of it like an exploration, like it's
like a learning
game. Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me quite a bit of my first play of Barrage. It's a very complicated game. There's a lot of interlocking pieces. And at least for me, it was opaque in the rules teaching. It wasn't something where like, oh, clearly this happens. There's a lot of things where, again, at least for me, the interconnectedness of the game wasn't clear until you get into it. But with Barrage, you know where the rainfall is going to be. You know where the water is going to come down the rivers. So at least I could sort of hook onto that. I knew that, like, for example, in the 4th round, the water is going to be going down this river. So for me, I was like, okay, my entire plan at the beginning of the game, my goal will be to place the dams and basically own that water in the 4th round. So my mindset going into Barrage was like, 4th round, you're going to be the one who has the dams where the water is coming. So for the first 3 rounds of that game, all I was doing was trying to set up an infrastructure that would take advantage of that big 4th round push. And so that's what I did. I was like, I may not understand how this all connects. And actually, as we were playing Barrage, I started seeing how that connection worked, and it helped me in building that infrastructure. I was like, okay, all I knew at the beginning was like 4th round, that water is going to be yours. And then as we were playing the game, I was learning how to best use the water once I had it. So it helped me build the infrastructure. And then sure enough, and this was because I was playing with a lot of people who were playing it for the first time, so nobody was super experienced, but it ended up working for me in that game. In plenty of games it doesn't work. In Mini Express it didn't work, but in this game I was able to jump in that 4th round, build a big dam, control the water, and score a bunch of points that I had set up the rest of the infrastructure for. So that's an example of a game where that finding a hook, pre-planning, and executing worked for me. At least worked in terms of winning. I mean, it may not have allowed me to pull as many levers as other people would find appealing, but it worked for what I was going for.
It's funny, I do not remember my own first play of one of our favorite card games, No Thanks, but there is such obvious pitfalls sometimes when you're playing these games, because in No Thanks you don't want cards, and the cards are valued like 3 to 35, and so everyone is bidding to not take something. So I think this happens a lot, and this is more of like a reverse auction game, but everyone puts in chips, and then at some point someone has to take that card, and no one wants to take that card. So if the first card in a game comes out and it's a 32, it's going to take 7 rounds around the table before anyone picks that up. Well, on a first play of the game, the new player almost inevitably reaches for that card 6 rounds too early, and everyone at the table is just like, "Oh, you sure you want that? Like, I don't think you want that." And they're like, "Yeah, well, I want some more chips," and they've doomed themselves literally on their first turn in No Thanks. And for some reason, that sticks out to me as those sharp edges on a very first play. I just laugh at people.
You don't try to help them?
No.
It's your 70th play and it's their first and you're just laughing?
Gotta increase that win rate, baby.
You did just remind me of my first play of Raw. So as you mentioned before on the podcast, I came to this relatively late. I've still only played it once about, 6 months ago. And I was playing it with people that have played plenty of Raw. And one of the things that is very apparent in an auction game is that knowing the value of anything you're bidding on only becomes apparent in subsequent plays. So it does feel like a little bit like you can't help but just be feeling in the dark. But okay, I think this is going to be worth 3 points, so I'm going to bid this much for it, but you have no real way of knowing that, or no real way of intuiting that on the first play. So I think that I was forced to, in that game, lose badly, but spend the time trying to evaluate, okay, now I see what these are going to be worth on the second play. Now I see what's going to be worthwhile exploring down the line.
Do you guys ever do, or would you ever do an actual learner game? Okay, let's play half of this, and then...
It would expressly need to be stated and agreed upon before the game.
But you would not.
I would love that. Actually,
you would.
I would prefer it. I would prefer going into a game night saying we are going to play 2 games of this.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much it would change my mindset in that first game, but I would feel a lot better about being more explorative in that first game.
It would free you up in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would love that.
One of the things I've seen people do, and I wonder if this would be worth us doing, is just literally playing a round properly and then resetting and starting over, almost.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because don't go through the entire burden of a whole full game, but at the very least get past your sea legs of I don't know what's even going on, and then start over proper. I thought that might be a good idea for us, but who knows?
So that'll do it for our discussion on first plays.
What was the first play you ever saw, Christina?
Wait, what?
What was the first play you ever saw?
I ever saw?
First play as on a stage.
Oh, an actual
It's a play on words.
Pivoting to the theater.
I see, pivoting. What was the first play
that you remember seeing?
It must have been Book of Mormon. Why are you shaking your head?
Callan is frantically shaking his head no.
Yeah.
You never saw Shakespeare or something?
No.
South Park, the musical.
No, yeah. Kellen, what did you surprise me? I don't know. He took me to Book of Mormon in New York City.
Sorry, how's that pronounced?
That's not how you pronounce it.
No, Kellen has to pronounce. He's the New Yorker. Kellen.
I don't say New York anymore because
we make fun of it.
I lived there once upon a time, and if I even casually mention it, my entire family starts on this tirade about,
you lived in New York once. Now you're a New Yorker. Oh, Kellen's a New Yorker. He lived there for a year. Come on, you're not a New Yorker.
I didn't say I was.
So, like I said, that'll do it for the podcast today. Thanks for listening. And thank you to Heart Society for the intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. Don't forget to visit us on Discord, boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, and any other social media platform like Twitter and, Instagram, Facebook. Are there any others?
No, that's it.
Okay. Email us. Feel free to tell us what you think. Talk to us. What else do we say? Is that it?
ask Kellen for pizza recommendations.
Oh yeah, Kellen. What's the best pizza in Manhattan?
I do have a couple of different places, if we're going to get real here.
Oh, don't embarrass yourself. Thank you for listening. And have a good night, day, weekend.
Bye.
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 All right, let's hit stop.
Wait, we don't have any outro.
Oh, we have
outro. Oh, we have plenty of outro.
Kellen, you're really distracting. He's making all these really confusing gestures. I don't know what he's trying to express, but nobody understands. Okay. Hello, and welcome to episode number... Somebody fill in the blank here. I'm not a normal...
122.
This is how this is going to go?
Yeah, just fill in the blank whenever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
just say blank every single time you want to fill in.
Exactly. And then, yeah, it'll work. Okay, so it's
2.
Perfect. Okay. Hello, and welcome to episode number 122 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. This is your host, the Blue Tank, Christina. And with me, as always, I have Mark and Neelan and Kellen.
Would you say that I'm the one who's with you, as always, the most?
Who could say?
Well, I would hope that you could answer that question.
So here we are today, together but not together. And we're
Except for, once again, you and I.
Well, yeah.
Who I hope are together.
We are here to talk about what we've been playing. No, that's not right. Okay, so we're here. Today we're going to talk about first games, more specifically, how we approach plays of first games and how we all approach them kind of differently. What is this episode about? I came up with the topic and I don't even know.
How we approach playing games for the first time.
Yeah, that sounds boring though, doesn't it?
Well, they all sound boring until we work our math.
That's right.
You need some pep in your
Pizzazz.
step.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. How do you put pizzazz in how we approach first plays?
Wow,
it's so hot in here already. You do an exercise.
You could do a sentence that's like, do you try to learn and take every type of action your first game, or do you go straight for the win?
That's some pep in your step.
You don't think that was better? Mark, you're laughing?
No, it was good.
I think
That was a low bar to beat, but it was better technically, I'd say.
Technically.
Was it better than Christina asking what the topic was? I think so.
Let us hope.
Okay, so, wow, I never realized how hard it is to be the host. I've never actually been the host. I've introduced, and I've what does Colin say? Ding and dop?
Yeah, ding and dop.
Yep.
No, what is it really?
That's Dippin' Dots. That's good.
Dink and dank?
Dink and dunk, I think.
Dink and dunk. What do you,
dunk and dink.
These are NBA. Have you never watched basketball?
That's a real sports term, Christina.
Dink and dunk?
Trust me.
Half of that is
Mark?
a sports term.
Yeah,
Half of
I
that
know.
is.
I know what a dunk is, Kellen. I know more.
You don't know what a dink is?
Yeah, Kellen, can you define a dink in the sports terminology for me?
It's the opposite of a dunk.
When you go up through the net.
How many points is that worth?
-3.
Neelan is talking, of course, about the South African NBA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, God.
The RSA NBA.
The RSA NBA.
All right.
So this is
All
going to
right.
be an easy edit.
Did I do the...